Good afternoon. I don't have any financial relationships to disclose, and my research study was called an automated case-based directed reading program to improve resident reading and intraoperative teaching. My name is Gopwani. So anesthesiology residency programs have classically implemented lecture series uniformly for all trainees. This morning, I'm giving a lecture on pyloric stenosis. Unfortunately, our lecture halls often look more like this. Now, the problem is not that our lecturers are not engaging or that our learners are not interested. The problem is we're teaching a topic that's irrelevant to most of the people in this room. For example, these medical students are still trying to figure out how the operating room works. The PGY2s have never taken care of a child in the OR, and the PGY4s finished their pediatric anesthesiology rotation a year ago. The goal of this intervention was to use technology to reach learners in a more personalized way based on the cases they're doing that day in the operating room. So we must understand our residents to be adult learners. Adult learning theory states that as we grow as learners, our readiness and motivations to learn change. Younger students accept that they'll sit in a lecture hall and learn vast amounts of information, building blocks that they may not use for a decade. Adult learners are not oriented towards this postponed application of knowledge, but to the immediacy of application. For this reason, modern e-learning in a professional environment is asynchronous, it's personalized, and it's just-in-time. Just-in-time teaching focuses on a feedback loop between web-based resources and the learning. With this information, we dove into the literature to identify 3 gaps we wanted to address. The first is that we assume residents are doing this case-based reading in a self-directed way, but the literature is clear that several barriers to this exist. The second is resident reading in general. Residents report reading 4 hours per week, but all feel that they should be reading more. And the third is inadequate support and appreciation for intraoperative teaching as a skill. The top attributes of intraoperative teachers are literature use and context, teaching relevant to the case. We want to support those attributes. So in our first phase, our research question attacked the first 2 gaps, and we asked, will an automated case-based directed reading program increase the amount that residents read and learn? We used a non-random convenience sampling, enrolling our 10 PGY2s in our accessible population. So to achieve our targeting, we built and implemented an active near real-time decision support system. We first built a departmental intranet, which contained the OR schedule and assignments. We then used some code to splice these schedules to figure out where the residents were and what cases they're doing. We then cross-referenced this with a database of teaching file articles, which had 144 articles mapped to 12 rotations. We took this database, plugged in the cases that the residents were doing, and pushed out a targeted resource for each resident, providing a just-in-time, just-for-you educational resource for each resident. To test this intervention, we conducted a prospective randomized crossover study with a repeated measures design. All residents were enrolled in July, and the study period was 4 months. We randomized the resident to be enrolled for 2 of the 4 months, the other 2 months serving as a control, and repeated this process for all 10 residents. So we underwent this complex randomization process to control for 3 essential confounders. There's variance between residents, variance between rotations, and between time points in the year that will all impact reading and learning, and all are controlled for in this process. In July as a baseline, and at the end of each month, we asked the residents how many hours per week they read, and also conducted identical pre and post knowledge tests to determine knowledge acquisition changes. So we compared all data, all outcomes using paired t-tests for the relative change. So we saw how residents were impacted when they were enrolled in the program, Delta 1, and also how they changed when they were not enrolled in the program, Delta 2, and then compared those differences. So this shows the change in resident reading in this first phase. July as a baseline, defined as the x-axis, the residents reported reading 6.5 hours per week. When the residents were enrolled in the directed reading program, their reading increased by 2 hours per week, shown on the blue line here. When they were not enrolled in the red line, their reading decreased by a half hour per week. This paired difference of 2.5 hours per week is statistically significant with a p-value of 0.0079. Now, prior interventions have utilized sample ABA questions as a surrogate for knowledge, and we followed that lead. Now, while the residents enrolled in the program showed improvements in knowledge acquisition with an absolute change of 10% and a relative change of greater than 20%, the p-value was really only 0.32. So it was not significant. We showed we would need about an N of 50 to show significance here. In phase 2, in the last month of the year, we re-randomized the residents into the program for 2 of the 4 weeks, this time sending the articles not just to the residents, but also to the faculty, asking them to use it as a teaching tool. We then asked the residents how many hours they read, how often the faculty used the articles as a teaching tool, and to evaluate the teaching, and looked at the impact, the size of the effect on the teaching evaluations using the Cohen's d. So looking at the last month of the year here, the reading is shown in continuity with phase one. And in the second phase, the change in resident reading was nearly an hour a day. So when residents were not enrolled in the program, they had stopped reading altogether, while residents who were enrolled continued to read at their baseline levels, and the p-value for this is 0.009. Unfortunately, the discussion rate was not what we hoped for, and the residents reported the faculty used the articles as a teaching tool only 15% of the time. But when they did use the articles as a teaching tool, it had a large effect on the teaching evaluations with the Cohen's d of 0.8. So we succeeded in reaching our learners in a more personalized way and increased resident reading, but did not create a consistent facilitative teaching tool. So limitations must be appreciated. Resident reading was self-reported, which is certainly a drawback, even though measures were frequent and controlled. Our accessible population was only 10, which is small. The second phase of the study period was limited by resident matriculation, and we didn't have the scale or design to show knowledge acquisition changes by, for example, board pass rates, which really would require several years of intervention with the historic control. So the next step is to really reflect on why this did not work as a facilitative teaching tool. And we really should target in the faculty teaching preferences into the targeting to layer that in. We plan to expand to additional users in anesthesiology and otherwise, and also have used our technological framework in other applications. So I just want to finish by offering the broad conclusion that this type of intervention creates value for graduate medical education systems using technology to streamline the teaching process. Nowadays, our residents and faculty are always asked to do more with less, and this type of solution facilitates the educational process that residents need and the teaching environment that our faculty desire. Thank you.